This is 10 minutes around the world. We'll start off with the news coming from Nigeria, the headlines at least, and then we'll move on to the news coming from around the continent and on to the rest of the world. As always, we would love to get your thoughts. Now, starting off with Nigerian headlines from Punch. Tinubu's first anniversary gift. FG plans a fresh cash transfer scheme for 75 million Nigerians. From The Guardian, Naira strengthens to 1,173 Naira at the official markets. From Punch, minimum wage talks collapse again as Labour rejects 60,000 Naira. Next headline comes from Daily Trust. Lagos signs deal with Dutch firm to generate power from waste. There certainly is a lot of that in this city, and it would be interesting and nice to see how this turns out. Insecurity. FG set to repeal 1963 Fire Service Act, and this headline comes from Daily Trust. From Daily Trust, finally, Senate passes bill on old national anthem. Nigeria, we hail thee. This is coming from a Daily Post, I beg your pardon. We'll speak about these headlines and more on Freshly Pressed, and that's from 7:30 here on the Smooth Breakfast. But let's move on to the news that is coming from around the continent. First stop this morning is Senegal. Now, President Bassirou Diomaye Faye on Tuesday launched a national consultation to reform and modernize the justice system, which is obviously a priority for the new leader. Now, he left prison just 10 days before he actually went on to win the elections. Now, his Prime Minister, Usman Sonko, and several other party members were in prison during the presidency of former leader Macky Sall. Now, they've repeatedly denounced the manipulation of the justice system over the past few years, and they did campaign on a promise of in-depth reform. Now, Faye on Tuesday spoke about the need to carry out a profound overhaul of the justice system in Senegal, citing the recent unrest, which basically shocked the country, which has been relatively stable for so many years. Now, according to him, the problem and urgency of reforming the justice system calls out to all, above and beyond any partisan considerations. The consultations represent the fourth edition of the National Dialogue, which is an initiative that was originally introduced by the former President Macky Sall, and it sort of brings together industry professionals, professors, basically members of the opposition and civil society, all stakeholders really, to deliberate. Now, the meetings are due to run up until the 4th of June, and it's going to happen near the capital of Senegal, which is Dakar. And then the conclusions are to be submitted to him after this. Next up is the DRC, where a new government spokesperson has been finally announced. It's coming after months of delay. There's been a lot of political uncertainty for a few months. Now, President Felix Tshisekedi had won a second term after the elections in late 2023. That had also handed, of course, his party, the Sacred Union Coalition, a large majority in parliament. But there'd been a lot of internal fighting and wrangling and jostling for jobs, and that had affected the formation of a new cabinet of ministers. Now, the president eventually is named Judith Sumiwa as the first female prime minister. Well, he did name her sometime in April, and ex-chief of staff Vital Kamerhe as parliament spokesperson on the 22nd of May, and that has basically paved the way for the appointment of a new government. Now, the new cabinet comprises of 54 ministers. There were 57 in the previous administration. And so this is just a little bit smaller than the expected downsizing, despite pressure to reduce costs. All right, and still on African news, this is interesting. The EU is providing 201 million euros in humanitarian aid funding to address the needs of the most vulnerable people in Africa, and it cuts across Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, and Nigeria. Now, the announcement comes on the occasion of the official meeting of the Sahel, the senior officials meeting on the Sahel and Lake Chad. It's been attended, or it was attended, by EU Commissioner for Crisis Management, Jeunesse Lekachik, in Brussels. Now, the funding will help support food security and assistance, basically to kick out malnutrition, healthcare, and protection, as well as improve water, sanitation, hygiene, shelter, and even education activities. Now, the overall funding will support projects in Burkina Faso with about 26.9 million euros, Cameroon 21 million, and Chad with 57.9 million euros. Now, this would include the newly allocated 8.7 million that's basically in response to the conflict in Sudan and neighboring regions as well. Let's move on to the news that is coming from around the world. The United States says it's deeply saddened after an Israeli attack in Rafah, which is in Gaza, had left 45 people dead. Now, a blaze had torn through a camp for displaced people. The Israeli military has promised that its investigation will be swift, comprehensive, and transparent. They're going to investigate this incident where already vulnerable people who are struggling just to stay alive were attacked. And despite whatever the investigations may or may not come up with, those 45 people are never coming back. And it's certainly not going to ever be forgotten, for all Palestinians, particularly those who've lost family members. Really, really tragic. In fact, that is how Benjamin Netanyahu described it. He called it a tragic accident. Moving on to Georgia, the parliament voted on Tuesday to override a presidential veto of a bill on foreign agents. Now, it did plunge that country into crisis, ignored criticism from the West, which says that this legislation is authoritarian and Russian-inspired. Now, the vote to ignore the objections of President Salom Zubachivli and it's very interesting, really. Very interesting. But let's move on to business. A majority of Europe's chief executives believe relations between Europe and China will certainly get worse, not better, over the next 3 years. The EU is de-risking its strategy, and these close ties with, it's citing Beijing's close ties with Moscow as its greatest challenge. And finally, on to sports. Victor Osimhen has been ruled out of the Super Eagles' forthcoming FIFA World Cup qualifying games against South Africa and Benin Republic. Now, he was second-half substitute in Napoli's 0-0 draw against Lecce in the final game of the Serie A season. He's expected to be out for 4 weeks. And that is it for 10 minutes. Let us know your thoughts. 0809 440 981. Business Express from 6:30. Stay with us.
Around the world on Smooth Breakfast. Moving, grooving music on Smooth 98.